I'm Dominic Janes, and my role at UAL is to be Professor of Cultural and Visual Studies, which obviously is quite a kind of huge area. Within that, I focus on basically cultural and visual studies in Britain since the 18th century. And my kind of core academic area is gender and sexuality. So that's sometimes referred to as kind of queer visual culture. So in the couple of years that I've been working at UAL, based at LCF, I have been developing events which bring together academics, students from UAL and members of the LGBT community to discuss issues in queer visual culture. And associated with all of that, I also have a kind of my own kind of research and publications program. So I also write and publish books. Well, the core idea behind that Chairs Present lecture was that it was the 25th anniversary of the publication of a central queer studies text, which is Eve Kosofsky Sedgwick's Epistemology of the Closet. And this book, originally published in 1990, written from an American perspective, explored basically closeted desires both in fin de siècle literature, so the writings, for example, of people like Henry James, or in the early 19th century Marcel Proust, but also connected the way in which sexual tastes and identities were concealed or half expressed in text with contemporary culture wars taking place in America and of course across the world in the 1990s, particularly in the context of the AIDS crisis. So this is a key text from that period, a key text in the development of what became known as basically queer studies. And what I had done in some of my research was to connect that work with visual studies, with fashion studies, and in a way my book Picturing the Closet was a kind of visual culture kind of counterpart to what Eve Sedgwick was doing. So when I put together the Chairs Present event, I wanted to do something which connected with my book, but was primarily, if you like, about Eve Sedgwick and her legacy. So what I did is I assembled a group of speakers and said to them, think about Eve Sedgwick. These are all people who worked on Eve Sedgwick and her legacy and so forth, and the issue of the visual, and why it might be important to still think about these issues 25 years on. You know, if we're totally liberated, why do we need to worry about the closet and secret desires? So on a particularly warm evening in June, we all kind of met up together, and we had three contrasting, I call them presentations, because one of them was kind of really quite a formal, traditional lecture. One of them was a kind of discussion around visual materials, which Eve Sedgwick had actually produced. And another one was actually around visual materials associated with Orientalism and lesbianism. And then also we had a kind of semi-cabaret performance thing as well. I think my idea there was to actually get a whole variety of different responses to this kind of theme.
Thank you for coming along. My name is Dominic Janes, and this is one of a series of events that the University of the Arts London have been putting on and will continue to put on over the next 12 months. And the title of the series is called The Chairs Present, which is slightly strange phrase. It sort of suggests, furniture getting up and coming alive. These are referring to the university chairs or professors that were appointed a year ago in a range of different subjects. And I'm one of those people, and my subject is a rather broad area of cultural and visual studies. Now, within that, I work particularly in queer history, queer visual culture. And when I was asked to organise a chairs event, I thought, well, the obvious thing to do is to get some people in who are luminaries in the field of, broadly speaking, visual culture, and also queer visual culture, and whose work I know has touched on and been involved with the very important queer theorist, writer, Eve Kosofsky Sedgwick. Now, as it so happens, this is the 25th anniversary of Eve Sedgwick's remarkable book, The Epistemology of the Closet, which is very kind of close to my kind of academic heart, because it was partly the inspiration for a research project and a book that I've written called Picturing the Closet. So this is partly an excuse to kind of pander to my interests, but there you go. And also to have, once we're finished in here, a kind of wine reception. And, if anyone wants to talk to me about my book, that's perfectly fine. But the other thing about this evening is that it's called Chairs Present, because I'm meant to be presenting other people rather than just going on for too long myself. So I'm just going to introduce to you very briefly Whitney Davis, as you can see. Thank you.
Binarisms and Binds, Epistemology of the Closet at 25. Written in the late 1980s context of an open season on gay men in public discourse, not to speak of gay bashing and health crisis, the central claim of Sedgwick's Epistemology of the Closet remains as exciting to me now as it was 25 years ago. An understanding of virtually any aspect of Western culture must be not merely incomplete, but damaged in its central substance to the degree that it does not incorporate a critical analysis of modern homo-heterosexual definition, an operation that intersects every issue of power and gender and transforms the other languages and relations by which we know. Sedgwick didn't greatly revise the history of that process of definition from 1880 to 1980, David Halperin's 100 Years of Homosexuality, denominated, as Foucault had emphasized, as a species in the field of eroticism and sex, in which one particular sexuality was distinctively constituted as secrecy. But in virtuoso readings of public discourse in the 1980s and of earlier American, British, and French novels, she unraveled the radical and irreducible incoherence of the definition, its constituting contradictions, about which she said, there were no epistemological grounds for adjudicating or arbitrating as to their truth.
I'm delighted to be part of today's conversation, and I want to thank Dominic for inviting me. And I've got a lovely a lovely paper stand here, a lectern made up of a pile of your books. So that's a nice way to start. This talk comes from an ongoing project of mine that addresses a gap in my own considerations of gender and Orientalism, in which the lesbian associations of the harem have often been the sub rather than the main text of my work. Today, I'm giving a snapshot of two women, the Ottoman Turkish Muslim author Selma Ekrem and the Polish-Danish artist Elizabeth Jericho-Bauman, in order to think about the place of homoeroticism in cultural production by Western and Ottoman women writers and artists. Sedgwick taught us to recognize the productivity of the closet in establishing and enshrining a binarized model of sexuality for Western modernities, using Euro-American literary cultures for her case studies. Tonight, I'm going to focus on what are sometimes called non-Western modernities. I want to explore how the different organization of gender and desire in Islamicate, gender-segregating societies produces different versions of the homosocial and the heterosexual and the homosexual. Each of these terms are themselves, of course, also simultaneously constituted by and constitutive of the Western sexual identifications and gendered cultures of which Sedgwick initially wrote. One of the great strengths for me of Sedgwick's work has always been how considerations of race and ethnicity and class are integral to her conceptualization of the field of sexuality and gender, in an intellectual framework that's firmly anchored, as we've been hearing, in feminist, anti-imperial and anti-racist scholarship and activism. My work is especially linked to debates about the racialization of discursively produced gender and sexual identities. I also take from Sedgwick's thoughtfulness about materiality an emphasis on the determining role of the market, in this case, the market for Orientalism, in the articulation, distribution, and consumption of cultural forms concerned with sex, gender, and ethno-national religious identities and their related pleasures. And I especially love Jason taking us through the materiality of her books and other products. Focusing on the construction of Sapphism in the Seraglio, I want to put discussion about sexual and gender identities in the context of competing imperialisms and multiple Orientalist cultures. Thinking about histories of sexuality in the plural and in relation to multiple modernities is, I argue, essential to understanding the transcultural movement of bodies, ideas, and cultural commodities that were framed through the mutually constituting relations of, in my case, Ottoman and Euro-American imperialisms.
Just to start off, Dominic asked me to say something about fashion. Tonight, I'm working Genderqueer, The Barricades, 1871 Autumn-Winter Collection. So, what I'm going to do tonight is going to be somewhere in the middle of cabaret and a lecture. So we'll see what happens. So I'm Birdla Bird, and I'm a queer feminist performance artist. With all you historians being here and academics and everything, I know that you'd all like to talk about methodology, and you probably like to know what my primary sources are. Well, my first... It's true. My first methodology is what is my gut feeling and what is my emotional reaction to a collection. Then after that, I jump to conclusions. Sometimes they're right, sometimes they're not. Then I establish the conclusion with rumour and gossip. Failing all of that, I'll go to the primary source of Tinternet, where I'll usually find out a few more facts. So this is actually my process, but I'm a bit of a history nerd, but I may have got something wrong. So if you find something I've got wrong in this, come and tell me, and I'll change it next time. Yeah, I did this in the Wallace collection in February, and I was invited to create this performance by one of my mentors, the artist Sadie Lee, who I'm sure many of you have heard of, who does a lot of LGBT work with museums. So first of all, I want to tell you a bit about the Wallace, because it's just around the corner. How many of you have been to the Wallace? Okay, excellent. Lots of you will know it. If you haven't been, go. The Wallace Collection is one of Britain's smallest grand houses. Its relatively pint-sized proportions distill luxury till it feels super concentrated. It's just at the back of Oxford Street. It's free, and the open house policy means that you can get up close and intimate with some of the interiors of ye old super rich. You can see the Laughing Cavalier, and you can see some of Madame de Pompadour's favourite smut. The Wallace is one of my favourite places in London, somewhere I love to work myself up into a frenzy, thinking about the relationship between high art and exploitation. I know you all do know, don't you? The preface to the Communist Manifesto opens with the great line, "A spectre is haunting Europe," and I'm going to elaborate on that and suggest that a spectre also haunts the Wallace collection, and that spectre is revolution.